Hey everyone. If you love this podcast, can you do me a big favor and please give us a review on whatever platform you're using and tell a friend or family member to subscribe? And speaking of subscribing, that's the best way to keep up because you'll get a notification each time we upload a new episode. So make sure you hit subscribe on whatever platform you're now using. Finally, if you're feeling generous, appreciative, or perhaps a bit guilty for getting all this free content, go to patreon.com/The Suzanne Venker Show and become a member. You'll get free ebooks, early access to the episodes, and a chance to win the occasional free 30-minute coaching session with yours truly. From the magnificent Midwest, it's the Suzanne Venker Show, where men and women are equal in value but wildly different by nature. Join us here every week as we challenge the culture's hugely flawed narratives about men, women, sex, and love. From coast to coast and from around the world, thank you for joining us. Hey everyone, guess who I have with me today? I have lured him here. I know. We are going to do a parenting series, which I told you I was going to do periodically, and that I would sometimes have my husband, Bill, with me, and I have him here today. Welcome to the show, Bill.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here. We're going to have a little fun today.
For those of you who have been keeping up for several years with this podcast, you did hear from Bill. I think it was 2020 or 2021, and I can't remember what we talked about, but so the voice might sound familiar, and to others it won't. But we're going to do something to sort of kick off this parenting series. We kind of had a conversation. Obviously, we have a list of things we want to be talking about going forward, but we came up with the idea of really covering the subject of discipline today, because we think that's such a universal. It's just a universal. I mean, everybody has to do it as a parent, and everybody struggles. And the way it is done today is very different from the way it was done in the past. And Bill and I have very strong feelings about that. So I thought, well, of all these topics we're going to talk about, Bill, what's one that we feel, pretty strongly about and get frustrated with when we see other people struggling, while also wanting to help as well. So that's where. Sorry,
I would like to add one thing. When I think about discipline, I think of it more in terms of setting up behavioral borders for children and giving them, consistency in terms of their behaviors with other people and themselves, and respect of adults, all those things that tie into that.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I think a lot of people think about discipline as punishment. And to me, that's just not at all what it is.
It's not meanness. No, you're helping that child behave properly and with love. It's a way of doing it with love. I'll never forget one time. I know this is a side thing, but we were at our local grocery store, and the kids were acting up and running around in the store, and I kind of grabbed them both by the hand and got down to their level and said, "We are in the store. There are people in the store, and you're running around, and it's not appropriate. You need to stop that, because you're going to run into someone, you're going to fall, you're going to hurt yourself, you're going to hurt somebody else." And they immediately stopped and behaved. And then another couple who was there, who was in the store, came over to me and said, "Thank you for doing that. We come to the store and there's so many kids that run around like wild animals, and it's very distracting and it's not safe," and all kinds of things.
What store was that? I don't know.
Well, I'm not going to name the store, but it was the local grocery store that we go to.
I wasn't with you, I guess, because I don't remember.
No, I was by myself, but yeah.
Do we still go to that store?
I go there a lot.
Oh. I don't know which one you mean. For those of you who don't know us, we have moved a couple of times in our marriage, actually 5 to be exact, but all in the same zip code. So, with the exception of one zip code. So even if we've moved around, we always are at the same store, I guess. Although I still don't know which store you're talking about.
5 times is disputable too.
Okay. Moving on. Okay. Okay, so I wanted to start by, we both agree that there is one really, we pretty much agree on everything we're going to talk about today, but we talked about the fact that really the number one thing for discipline across the board is starting young, starting early. And the way you start early when we talk about disciplining children is that before you can actually do the discipline, you have to build the bond. And I think, and I talked about this a couple of episodes ago when I was talking about daycare and how so much that goes on in those early years in the daily goings on with your baby and toddler is about building that bond. And if you've done it well and they are attached securely, then when you go to discipline down the road, you're going to be more effective than you would have been had they not securely attached themselves to you. So this is a big issue because I think that's very often part of what's going on in today's culture that did not exist 50 years ago. I mean, there's just no question about it that children did not have discipline problems both in our schools and at homes 50 years ago the way they do today. I don't think that's disputable. Do you think,
No,
Bill?
no, and you're leading down a path here on this. So what do you mean by what's the cause of that?
Oh, um, well, daycare is obviously what I was referencing there, in that if you are not there from day one to do the work, mostly it's women who do that work, obviously, as the mother. And yes, it can be done if it was the father, but I'm just going to use it as mothers, since still mothers are the ones who primarily take on that role, even today, even when they work outside the home. Um, that if you have not put in the time day in and day out for the first 3 to 5 years of life, you are going to struggle more down the road with discipline for a whole slew of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
One of which is they're not going to listen to you as well because they're
Mm-hmm.
kind of mad at you. Let's put it that way, because you weren't around. And B, you don't really know them well enough in terms of how they think and how they behave that where you would have if you'd been around from day one, so that you can't really be a very effective in it. So that's another piece of it. And then there's also the tired piece that you're always talking about. I think that's what,
that's exactly where I was going to go, was the exhaustion. And
yeah,
when it's weird how I noticed very early on with our kids that if they had enough sleep, they were easy to discipline or shape. If they were tired, it was like they were drunk and out of control. They were tired. They would
100%.
they'd cry, or they'd just do things that were uncharacteristic, and you're trying to get them to stop it, and they keep doing it. It was torture. It was torture. I remember having many conversations where, say, Henry didn't get a nap or Emma didn't get a nap, or it was like just like the kids were drunk.
Yeah,
it was just
totally.
crazy.
100%. That's so true. And that's what I mean when I was saying, if you're not there to do the work, that part of that work, I mean, like a huge piece of that work in the early years is teaching your children how to sleep. I had a whole section in the first book I wrote about how to sleep, teaching how to sleep and how to eat. That basically sleeping and eating takes up the first.
Well, it's their whole life.
I mean, well, yeah, it is.
And
their
bathing
whole,
and
yeah.
doing
but I
their
mean,
other biological things.
well, yeah, but I mean, but certainly the first 3 to 5 years, it's huge on that front, and it will last a lifetime if you put in that time in those early years. And I just don't think there's enough education about this at all whatsoever. No. So I'm not, trashing on parents. I'm saying I want to do this so that we can talk about what's not talked about, so that people can be more knowledgeable and can pass this on, because I don't think we talk about it at all. Okay, so part of building that bond is someone being there in the early years, but it's not just doing that work in the early years and being physically present by one parent. It's also what's the role of that second, sort of, let's say, less present parent. I want to put it that way, because today, of course, we know there's so many different ways to work outside the home. So there's a lot of people who can maneuver around in a way that they couldn't 30 years ago because of the internet and working from home and all that. So let's just assume primary caregiver and primary breadwinner, just for the sake of argument, which doesn't necessarily mean the person home doesn't earn any money. And it certainly doesn't mean the person who's the primary breadwinner isn't involved at home. So let's talk about the role of, in this case, it would be you in those early years. You were the sole for those early years, and I did not bring home an income. So what was your role? What would you say to other people as that?
Well, we worked very well together on that. I would say that I definitely wanted to be hands-on because I know from my own family story, my dad was not really around. So I want to make sure I was present in their lives. So, I'd get up and do my sales gig, and I'd, leave the house at 7 in the morning and be home, 5:30, 6 o'clock, whatever time that was. Suzanne would be making dinner, and then I was on duty for bath time, as we called it, and reading and before they go to bed, that kind of thing, or we'd watch a short video before we took them to bed, that kind of thing. So those times were very important, I think, on many levels, because then they actually got very much one-on-one, close, intimate time with me. Um,
And the weekend, let's not,
Yeah, the weekends. Well, then the weekends, and then as they get a little older, you start playing games with them, and like board games, and then you can take them outside and teach them how to play wiffle ball or whatever, and there's just a lot you can do.
and I think with the whole equality message that I've been fighting for so many years, there's just too much concern and worry about who's um how do I say this in a different way? I've always argued the idea that you have to both be doing the same thing at the same, not at the same time, but at the same level in order to be involved with your kids. In other words, you can have a traditional setup like we did and still be very involved as a breadwinner, which, by the way, is not to say that there aren't plenty of traditional scenarios where the breadwinner is literally not home.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I had a client recently who I know her husband is barely there. And when he is home, he's not really engaged. So that's not good parenting. Let's call it what it is. That's not being present. That's not being a dad, or if it's a mom, the mom.
But that's not to say that you don't have bad days. Either one of you, like, if you had a bad day, well, I would make dinner and carry the ball.
Yeah, but you have to be physically there and not at work at 6 o'clock.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. I know what you're saying. Or you just were tired or whatever, sick. So we always kind of balance each other out. And we were never these chores were your chores.
Never.
And these chores were my chores. If there was, I would make dinner. If something came up,
not too often,
I would do the dishes.
But you definitely cleaned up
laundry. Right. I would make the beds,
for sure,
whatever.
And I'm very fortunate. I've talked about this. You haven't been around when I've said this, Bill, but I've talked about the fact that I'm very fortunate with you, and I think a lot of my friends and family would say the same thing, because one advantage of your being a product of divorce, if I can find an advantage, it would be that you are very self-sustaining and independent, and picking up after yourself, cleaning up after yourself. None of that is an issue for me. When people talk about that, I don't even understand it. Makes me sad, because I assume that's where it comes from.
I would say that's probably part of it, because with my mom being my main parent, I learned to help out and do things, but that was common in my house anyway, even before then. When my dad was present, the kids did the dishes after dinner. We did chores. It wasn't like, okay, you don't have to do anything. Okay. It wasn't like that at all. It was everybody pitched in. It was like the Waltons.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, well, and then large family. Now that's another conversation altogether. But I think that's more common, correct me if I'm wrong, in large families than in small.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the beginning of the conversation about how to discipline effectively. We think that that's the beginning of it all, is building that bond early on, so that when it came time to discipline, you are they're respecting you and feel lovingly toward you because they've had enough time with you. I guess let's put it that way. And you've been consistent enough and available emotionally and physically to then be heard when you guide their behavior. I'll put it that way. Is that fair? Okay. Yeah. So building the bond. And did you want to say something about family dinner as well?
Well, yeah, that's something that has always been very important in our household. I would say that from both of us, because early on it was dinner every night. But then when they start to get older and get involved in other activities, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, sports, whatever it is, choir, I don't know, whatever.
We didn't have choir.
It gets harder to find those times. And so then you almost have to force it and say, okay, so and so's got this at this time, and so, okay, we have enough time, we can have a dinner. Because the thing about the dinners is that you learn things about their lives and they learn things about your life, and everybody's gaining something from that. And when you lose that intimacy where you're sitting down having a meal, it kind of breaks the family. I think it's not healthy at all. Even if it's once a week, that's great. It's not optimum, but it's better than zero and weeks and weeks and weeks of zero. There's something about that relaxed atmosphere where funny stories happen or sadness happens or tension, and you have to they learn how to navigate those things, even when you and your spouse are having a fight and it's obvious. um, they learn a lot from watching you get angry at each other and make up and say, oh, okay, so you can have a disagreement and still get along. That's a good thing for them to learn, that marriage is not, it's not a romantic ending in a movie. It's where life happens.
And so I think so then that to me is part of building the bond, because if you come
Yeah.
together for family dinner, which, let's face it, I mean, we're very old school. Everybody should just know that. Don't gauge it on ours. We definitely did. If the kids were here, they'd be like, we were eating dinner every night our entire lives. That's what they'll say. I guarantee it, if they were here, with maybe a few weeks or months here and there missing, maybe when Henry was doing hockey. But we were pretty faithful to that, and that's part of the bond building.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I put it here under
Mm-hmm.
this note, because
Yep.
that's what I thought of as okay. So that's kind of the basis for discipline, in our opinion. And then I broke up a couple different things. One, I'm just going to give a couple of suggestions and examples for things I did when the kids were little and I was home with them, that Bill wasn't so much involved in, because I was doing the Monday through Friday all day thing. And then we're going to talk about a couple of things that we did that don't have anything to do with, how often you're with them, and that we both did them together. So the first couple of things that I hope is helpful is, when it comes to meltdowns, let's say that meltdowns, like sort of like dad.
That's good. That's good. That's my role.
Even though we're empty nesters, I got to get out of the dad mode that Bill was referring to a moment ago. One of the ways that when I was struggling with, okay, I don't want to go to Target and have the whole conversation. Can I have this? Can I have that? What about this? What about that? And after you do that a few times, you just obviously want something to work so that you don't do that for the rest of your life, because that's not fun. So basically what I came up with was preparing them in advance for any time we would go anywhere. And Target or a retail store is just one. This also can apply to going to see family, or even going on a vacation. Anything where you have potential conflict that you can see coming up down the road, that you just have this conversation before you go in. So you're about to go into Target and you say, here's what it's going to look like. We're going in for this. We're not getting this. We'll maybe look at this, but we'll buy that at another time, or something where you've given them some boundaries to consider before that emotion overwhelms them when they get there. And then the next thing you know, you're having the meltdown. So that's probably one of the biggest things that I think was effective that I would do when the kids were younger, is prepare them in advance, have a conversation before entering the space for which you're concerned there'll be a conflict.
Honestly, I don't remember any meltdowns.
I have to say, I must have had them at the beginning to come up with this, and you probably weren't there. That's why I
remember
said
other things happening that were funny, but not
well,
that.
that's why I'm saying this is stuff Monday through Friday that you kind of were shielded from.
That's good.
And
Good job.
I think I came up with this after having those experiences, and I'm like, I'm not doing this for the next 10 years.
Sure.
Okay. So that's one thing. I hope that's helpful. Another thing that my daughter will say, she remembers vividly, is me telling her to save her tears. And that comes from her being, how you describe Emma when she was young. quite the crier, quite the emotional, like on her sleeve. If something hurt, she was not holding it in. She was crying. Crying is her
but
sort
then
of.
there was also pure and absolute joy
Oh,
at this
no,
all
no,
at
I
the
don't.
same time, like just
No, I'm saying when she
a
was
fountain
hurt
of
or
joy.
upset, like she
Yeah,
got the bee
sure,
sting. Remember, she got the bee sting.
sure. Oh
Oh
yeah,
my God,
yeah,
she cried like she'd been cut with a knife.
right.
I mean,
Or the time that Henry headbutted her.
yeah.
You know,
Well,
they're playing on the
yes,
floor and he headbutted
yes,
her.
yes.
She was like,
Although,
ah.
well, I don't know. That would hurt. That would hurt a lot. But
And Henry was like, what'd
yeah,
I do?
right. No, I just mean anytime she cried a lot. That's all I'm trying to say. She'll to this day, she cries when she's happy. She cries when she's sad. She's just, it's lovely. I'm not complaining about it. I'm saying that it was a little overwhelming as when I was caring for her every day.
Says the lady who cries when she
uh,
watches the Waltons.
Okay, that's the second time you brought up the Waltons.
Well,
Okay.
I can't help it. It's a good show. Everybody should watch it.
Oh my God. Okay. So I would tell her to save her tears, and that would basically what I was letting her know was, look, if you cry every single time, then the weight of when you really need to cry about something really big, you're not going to have any tears left. So I would tell her your tear ducts, or wait a minute, let me finish, would dry up. And if you use them for these stupid things, you won't have any when you need them. And that seemed to be very effective. And she'll even laugh about that to this day.
It also loses its impact when you do cry.
Yes,
you're crying all the time.
Exactly. Oh my God! Now I never had to say "save your tears" to Henry. Needless to say,
no. If anything, you'd be like, "Are you gonna cry?"
I know. Exactly. Okay, so that was the second one. Is the save your tears. Please feel free to use that if it works. And then the last one I was going to say is the 5-day rule, and this kind of goes back to the Target thing. You can see I spent a lot of time at Target with the kids when they were little.
Wait, I want to say something about the save the tears, because there are appropriate times to cry.
Oh, I know. That's what I'm saying.
There's nothing wrong with that, but the crying at the drop of, like, well, they had the video of her when she spilled the M&Ms, and then she's like, and then you're like, that's okay.
Yeah.
And then she stopped.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
That was like something going to take her over the edge and start crying over it. Like, so what? Anyway, okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, so the 5-day rule is when you see something you want, before you just break out your wallet and buy it, just for instance, you have to do the 5-day rule. And the 5-day rule is simply, you don't buy it when you see it. This is more of a money lesson, I guess. And if you still want it that bad 5 days later, then we'll go back and get it, assuming we can afford it and it's reasonable and whatnot. And of course, 9 times out of 10, after the time had passed, you'd forgotten about it and don't want it. I'll use that even for myself as an adult sometimes, but for kids,
I just used it today.
Yeah. For kids, they just, they're just emotional. They just want what they want. And it's about learning. That's the beginning steps of learning about money and delayed gratification, all of that. We're going to do a whole separate episode, by the way, on money, how to talk to your kids about money. So be watching out for that. I'm looking forward to that one myself. Okay. So those are the kind of the 3 things I could think of that kind of weren't really related to you so much, Bill, because stuff that I would do Monday through Friday.
Sure.
But then there's a couple of other things that we did jointly. I mean, a lot of discipline we did jointly.
Yeah.
One of them is always making sure to. Well, you want to do these here?
Well, it's just mainly, when they are misbehaving, to make sure that you get down to their level and that you're looking them in the eyes. And I mean, there were times where Henry did a lot of in the corner kind of stuff. We didn't do a lot of hitting. That was something we didn't do. But we put him in the corner. I think that made pretty much the statement. And I'd make him turn around in the corner, so his face was in the corner. And he didn't necessarily like it. He didn't cry a whole lot. Whereas Emma, we'd put her on a chair, and she would start crying sometimes, not always, but and then you would explain to them, we would get down to their level and explain to them why they were there, and that we were expecting a different kind of behavior. And if they did do that, they could come back into the realm of the living, as opposed to the naughty chair, whatever you want to call it.
And I think being on their level is important, because it shows that you're not trying to tower over them and be tyrannical, but rather just, I understand you, but here's how it's going to be, kind of thing. Yeah.
Right.
But
Yeah, let's get to this whole. I want
uh,
to skip to the not yelling
okay,
before you get
okay,
to the other one.
okay.
So the other piece of that is as a parent, you'll lose patience, and there are times where you raise your voice or you say something you wish you hadn't said. And I think it's very important that when you calm yourself down, you take the child aside and you apologize to them. I think it speaks volumes to them that, okay, I know my behavior wasn't right, and you explain to them like, this is why I lost my patience and how I reacted wasn't the right way, and I will try not to do that again. I'm tired, whatever. Parents get tired too, and you lose your patience. It occurs. um, and you got a million. Let's say you're doing a million things at once, and the kids aren't acting right. You're trying to make dinner. You're trying to do the laundry. You got all these things are tugging at you, and you lose it. And you yell at them and say something that's not the right thing to say to them. And you have got to heal that, because if you do not, they will carry that around the rest of their lives, and that's not something you want to leave them with. It's
Well, I
not
mean,
fair to them.
I
If
don't
it's
think.
mean, I mean,
Well, I was going to say if it's often, I wouldn't say one time doing
yeah,
that they're going to carry it
yeah.
forever. But you mean if that's just your regular MO for
Yeah,
years? Yeah,
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 yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, you can't do it. And I'm not saying it was bad stuff, but I just know, I know stories from my past about people where their parents would say stuff that was just not acceptable. With that, I'm not saying that happened with us, but I'm just saying it was very important to me to make sure that we address the situation and apologized if we kind of lost our cool, because it happens. And then again, they learn how to uh, create their own borders by realizing they might overreact in some way in their life, and then say, you know what, my mom and dad taught me that I should apologize to the person I overreacted with.
Okay, and then the last one is a big one, so we save it for last, and
Hmm.
that's
Well, it's especially big, I think, for
uh,
for boys, but I think it goes both ways
yeah.
nowadays, more than
Well, we
likely.
were a little fortunate too. Okay, well, let's just say what it is
Yeah,
first.
screen time,
Screen time. I mean, come on. I mean,
video
this
games,
social
computer,
media.
whatever. Yeah.
Well, so let's just back up and tell everybody. When I say fortunate, I mean our kids did not get a phone until they were 12, and that sounds to us like still way too
It
early.
is way too
It is way
early.
too early, knowing what we know now. But they didn't grow up with it, so phones were not the first 10 years of their life. It was just a non-issue. So when I look at what parents are dealing with now, it breaks my heart, um, because it's a shit show, honestly, to be frank. So all we can do is talk about what we experienced from our stage of the game where technology was, what it was doing at the time. So it was from 12 to 18 that they had phones, and phones were never a huge thing, at least not with Henry. When we talk about screen time, we're talking about whether it's video games. Um, Pretty much for boys is the standard, and then for girls it's their phone and social media. And again, even though Emma had a phone at 12, the social media wasn't until later. It just didn't come along yet, or it may have
Well,
started,
we
but
wouldn't have let her do it on
no,
top of that.
no.
And then Henry,
But
he
so
didn't
hold on,
use
wait,
the
wait,
phone
yes,
as for video
no.
games because we told him he couldn't. So I mean, we had clear rules about what the phone was for communicating.
There was no tech in their rooms for years as teens. We finally broke down with Henry. I think by the last 2 years of high school, he had a computer in his
Well, I
room.
think
But we
COVID was part of that too, and he built his own computer. But yeah,
yeah, there were just everything was in the family area. Everything was out in the open. Um,
and that to me that just reminds me of when we remember when we were kids. There was a phone that was, well, you had a phone in your room, but I didn't have that. We had a room. We had a phone
with
upstairs
my
and
own mind.
downstairs, and that was it. So if you were having a fight with your girlfriend, everybody in the house knew it. So there's no hiding anything, which is what I'm a big proponent of. But we're not
Yes,
in that age
we're
anymore.
not in that
So
age, but we tried as much as we could to sort of emulate it by making everything in the community family space. The high school years, Emma definitely was able to be on her phone, um, and I don't know, I had her on. I don't know if you remember that.
yeah,
Either last year or the year before, and we talked about screen time and
yeah.
social media and stuff. So I'm not concerned about how it all went down. It was fine in the end, but I do remember the relentless issues with Henry, because
Your
we
dad.
had to,
Yeah.
yeah, with the video games. And
It was like crack cocaine for him. He was like, we'd tell him to stop and he just couldn't stop. And
well,
I mean,
but you
he
have to
wouldn't stop the way we wanted him to stop. Put it that
correct,
way.
right. So we had an hour a day. It was all he was allowed. So we have to temper all this by explaining the real details, because people want to know exactly, like, what do you mean on a daily basis did that look like? Because today it's very different for people doing it than when we did it.
We'd still do it that way.
No, I know, but I'm saying they have so many more options now. For us, it was basically this TV with the what do you call that?
It was the Sony whatever.
Yeah.
It
was just that one thing. There was nothing
game.
handheld.
Yeah.
He never had handheld. It was always the big TV with that thing. And he had an hour. And so sticking to the hour a day, what Bill means is that getting him off was just extremely trying. And so
there was a lot of the whiny moany stuff going on.
So, but your efforts are rewarded if you, and here's the ticket, what we want to close out with when it comes to discipline, the key and the nugget of it all is consistency.
Mm-hmm. And you both have to be on the same page. Because if one's doing it one way and the other one's undercutting that by saying, "Oh, it's okay," mm-hmm. and then when the other spouse is gone and you're like, "Oh, well, today we're going to have fun day and do 12 hours of video games," that's not going to work. It's not going to fly. You're not helping them at all, and you're not helping each other.
And in fair, I mean, that's a whole subject in itself, because then it becomes more of a marital thing, which we're not going to get into that today, but. I think that is problematic for a lot of people, for sure. But yeah, consistency is the number one underlying theme of all of the stuff that we're talking about. It's the not giving up, and that's and keeping at it even when you feel like it's not working, because it is working. If you're in charge and they feel that you're in charge and you're not out of control and you're firm and you're consistent, it will pay off. And then the last thing I want to talk about, I'm going to ask you, Bill, if I were to ask you, or if somebody were to ask you, because I did a whole episode on this, what's the difference, in your opinion, between disciplining boys and girls? And should it be different? And if it is, why and how?
I think generally it is different and should be different. I would say that boys in many instances are so much more physical, and in many ways not quite as cerebral in terms of how they're thinking. So you have to explain to them. You have to explain both boys and girls when they're being disciplined, why they're being disciplined, and what the circumstances is. And so that what happens is they create a pattern in their mind of behavior. And they say, oh, okay, so hitting Henry learning to not hit Emma in the head when no one's looking is not acceptable. I mean, that's kind of a simple thing. But I'm just saying, it just the simplicity of it on that end. Whereas with the girls, at least in our experience with Emma, is that she was very reactive to the discipline. And so from that standpoint, she learned pretty quick how to behave in the proper way, I would say.
Because she didn't like disappointing people. She didn't want to be wrong. And all
right.
That. So
right.
that some of that is personality stuff. But I mean, like, with respect to the gender thing, okay, let me make this less open-ended. You've often said that you think I'm easier on Henry, and I've said you're easier
I think
on
that's
Henry,
true.
Emma. Yeah. And so it kind of goes hand in hand with what I talk about with masculine and feminine dynamics. And I think there is a component to that with parenting.
Absolutely.
So can you speak to that?
Absolutely. So in other words, my tendency would be more to spoil Emma or let Emma get away with things. And whereas with Henry, I'd be much stronger with him in terms of how he conducts himself. But that's not to say that there weren't times where.
But don't you think that's because you were able to depend on me as the woman who's in other words, Emma's a girl, female, and I'm a female.
That's
And
why
I was like, if I weren't there, would you have? I don't see you doing
it
that
would
if
be
I
hard.
wasn't
It's
there.
a compliment. I would have to. I would have to adapt somehow.
Yeah.
But we complement each other, and that's the reason why you have two parents, one male and one female.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a purpose.
That's a whole other subject.
That's a purpose. There's why it's set up the way it is. So,
but I mean, you knew that I was on her, and because a mother's relationship with their daughter is going to have that strife, maybe, or what's the word?
Yeah,
that you're not going to have.
Right. Well, just like with Henry, but she also got a good dose of Dee Dee, so that was your mom. So that was a whole nother layer.
That's true. That's a good point.
So on that end, with your mom, she got to be spoiled, and then she also got the discipline and the. When I say discipline, I'm just meaning more like personal borders in terms of how one conducts oneself.
I do think there's a whole nother element, though, with all this that we're talking about. I mean, you say you spoiled her. I don't know that she would. Well, I don't know. I don't know that she'd use the word spoil, but she definitely thinks you're easier on her.
I'd let her get away.
She definitely thinks you're easier on her.
Yeah.
I think there's an element here that is like on top of the consistency being a theme, and that's respect. And that goes back to the bonding thing. Like, I don't think she is. I think she came out more compliant by nature, and Henry came out more defiant by nature, and I think that's definitely in our DNA.
I don't know that I see Henry as defiant.
I mean, that's not even the right word, but
yeah.
No, because he's actually very compliant.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't know how I have to. I'm on the spot now because I don't know how I could describe them differently in that respect because they're both so, great on. I don't know. I don't want to talk so much about our kids. I'm just saying in terms of the male female thing, I think the respect piece is big in that goes back to the bond thing, and that can come back and help you when it comes to disciplining. So she respects you so much that I don't think there was a lot of need to discipline her. That's what I'm thinking of. It's like you didn't have to discipline her as much as you did Henry.
Yeah, no.
And I think that's a guy thing. And it was strong. It was just like you were very smooth and easy with Henry.
It's more of a cerebral brain thing that boys are just kind of rambunctious by nature. So that's kind of a big word when I use that in terms of his kind of bouncing around all over the place and doing things that maybe weren't okay. Like take advantage, take a sample of the time that they were kind of messing around in the house. They're in their jammies, they're in thetheir onesies, and Henry headbutted her because they were kind of wrestling. I said this earlier, and then he was like, it was no effect on him. He butted her in the head.
Yeah.
He wasn't crying. It was up. Emma started bawling like crazy.
Right.
And she totally was like, "Oh my God, what did you do to me, Henry? Never do again. Never do again." Yeah. And he was like, "What did I do?"
Yeah.
We're like, "Henry, go kiss her. You got to kiss her.
Yeah.
And say you're sorry." Yeah. And I don't even know if he could even talk then. He just went up and hugged her and kissed her. And they looked over at us like, "Was that okay? Did I do that right?"
Well, that's funny.
Still upset?
What's funny about that is him learning that, girls are different. You can't do that because they're more delicate and they get
right.
And by the way, I want to preface all this by saying, not preface it, I've already said it, but I want to frame it by saying we understand that not everybody has, there's tomboy girls, right? And there's more docile, bookish boys. So they're not all going to be, we just happen to have a very boy son and a very boyish son and a very girlish son, daughter.
Right.
But it's not to suggest that they're all, you're going to have this exact same experience. Right. We can only speak from ours. That's all. Right. So that's why we're doing this. But at the theme of it for everybody is consistency and then that respect.
Yep.
And that lends itself very well to an easier time disciplining once that bond is established. And I just
mutual
don't feel
respect.
Like,
it's mutual
mutual
for them and for us.
100%, 100%. Because one of the things, if you guys want to go back and listen to how I did a whole episode on, I think it's episode 28. Yes, you can and should raise your daughters and sons differently. I was with Andre Parody. And so I talked differently about how, yes, it's perfectly normal and fine to raise your children differently based on their sex because they're different. But that part of that respect, like Bill says, goes both ways, and that means they feel your respect as much as you want theirs as the adult.
Mhm.
It really, that two-way street is really huge. I just don't feel like we had a
Well,
whole lot of discipline.
no,
I just
I
don't.
don't. I don't know. Maybe we blocked it all out. I don't know.
I don't know. I have to ask the kids. I think they would say that. I think they would agree on how we're describing it. That this
Yeah.
is really the reason why it went relatively smoothly. Now that we're empty nesters and
Well,
can
it's
look
just
back,
like,
but of course, it's all hindsight is
yeah. And
2020.
I really do believe the communicating is just a big thing in all of it. You know, explaining to them the appropriate behavior. This was not the appropriate behavior. This is how we're expecting you to conduct yourself. And it's repeated over and over and over all these different instances. And then they kind of realize, oh, okay. And I really do believe that we ended up with two very mature young children that were, I think, at a different level than their own kids. They're
Peers.
many of their peers.
Yeah. So
it was fun.
That's all I had, really.
Yeah, for today's episode.
Yeah, it was fun.
With Bill. We'll do it again.
Thanks for coming
on,
Bill.
We'll come up with another subject.
Yeah.
Maybe
I got a list.
More parenting. Yeah, I'm sure you do.
Yeah, so hopefully that was helpful to everyone. And again, any questions and comments, I'd love to hear from you. See you guys next week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And that ends this hour of the Suzanne Venker Show. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and to leave us a review, as well as share this episode with a friend. As always, you may reach me with any questions or comments at Suzanne@thesuzannevenkershow.com. And if you would like to support this podcast, which would be very much appreciated, you can do so at patreon.com/The Suzanne Venker Show. Thanks, everyone. Have a good week.